What we will build
Kier
on.
Starmer, a pledge is not an indication. A pledge is a word, is your word. It's a pledge.
Bit collective
It's
action.
not in your pledge.
Well, the pledge is 3 lines, Andrew. You're asking me for more detail and I'm giving it to you.
Well, but the fact is the 2016 Trade Union Act, when it comes to cribbing and curtailing union power, is not the key legislation.
Give me a-
Because you're hiding behind the process.
No, the Labour Party
Why
said-
don't you do what the other candidates do and tell? Don't Labour members have a right,
Well-
as they decide whether to vote for you or not, they want to know where your money's coming from.
I've been asked that many times. I've said it's coming from trade unions, from crowdfunding, from individual donations.
Who's your biggest donor?
It's coming from those 3. One of my biggest donors was put up on the website, I think, yesterday.
Right,
or
that's
the day
one of the lawyer.
Yes.
That's the lawyer.
What happens when a politician renowned for measured responses is caught off guard? That's precisely what Andrew Neil accomplished when he confronted Kier Starmer. Neil's incisive questioning and refusal to accept vague answers transformed the interview into a spectacle, leaving Starmer visibly flustered. Each pointed query highlighted Starmer's unpreparedness, casting serious doubt on his prime ministerial credentials.
Campaign is I've got people from different parts of the party on my campaign working together, because I know that simply saying unity isn't enough. Everybody's going to say
That's
that.
not
I've got to
unpalatable. What I'm
model it.
asking you is a position you're taking that the Corbyn left will find unpalatable.
Well, I'm not particularly interested in finding things that they find palatable or
Every time Starmer attempted to deflect or evade, Neil pushed harder, demanding clarity. The tension was unmistakable, and for viewers, it was gripping. This wasn't just an interview. It was a chess match where Neil strategized 3 moves ahead, while Starmer struggled to keep up. In those moments, Neil cemented his reputation as one of the most formidable interviewers in politics, while Starmer appeared as though he'd stumbled into a storm he wasn't prepared for.
Principle at stake that Labour Party members who are being asked to vote for you should know who's bankrolling your campaign.
That is why the Labour Party set up those rules.
But you
which
won't
was-
tell us.
The Labour Party rules say carry out the checks, which we have to carry out, and I've got a compliance team doing that. Once you're satisfied the checks are carried out and the donations are proper in order, they go to the parliamentary authorities who put them on the parliamentary website so that everybody can see them. I've been following that procedure. That is exactly the
But the
parliamentary
other
rules.
candidates in this contest have published who is bankrolling their campaign.
After rattling Starmer, Neil switched tactics and honed in on the substance, or lack thereof. He called out Starmer on statements that didn't align with reality, demonstrating that preparation alone couldn't shield him. Whether it was policy commitments or personal claims, Neil came armed with evidence. When Starmer attempted to sidestep or provide vague explanations, Neil stayed focused. He directly confronted him, highlighting the contradictions in his answers. For instance, Neil wasted no time challenging Starmer on his shifting positions on key Labour policies. Starmer's evasions only deepened the scrutiny, as Neil persisted until the inconsistencies were impossible to ignore.
A pledge is not an indication. A pledge is a word, is your word. It's a pledge.
I'm not disputing that. I don't have any problem.
So is it a pledge that these industries will be in your manifesto for nationalisation?
Yes, it is. The point I'm making to you is the manifesto will have to have a lot more than that.
Of course, I
This is
understand
not a
that.
manifesto.
Well, what
This is
about
a
university
starting point.
tuition fees then? Will you remain committed to scrapping them in
They're
your
all
first term?
pledges, Andrew. So the answer to these questions is
This wasn't just about catching a politician in a lie, it was about accountability. Watching Starmer squirm under the pressure, it became evident that Neil wasn't one to shy away from the uncomfortable. If Starmer believed he could talk his way out, Neil made it clear, the hard way. Facts don't bend. Neil's grilling of Starmer wasn't a one-off. It's the hallmark of his reputation. He spent years building a career on being sharp, fearless, and relentless in holding politicians to account. Few journalists have the skill to make leaders from all parties dread the spotlight, but Neil has mastered it. His interviews aren't just questions, they're trials. Politicians often come armed with rehearsed talking points, expecting a routine exchange. Neil doesn't play by those rules. Instead, he probes deeper, interrupts when answers veer off course, and insists on clarity. His method forces honesty, or exposes its absence.
University tuition fees being scrapped will be in a Starmer manifesto.
Yes, that's why it's
The
a
next
pledge.
election. Okay. Why then doesn't the Labour left trust you?
Well, I'm asking members to vote for me in this election. We will find out on the 4th of April what the members have decided.
Neil's reputation for dismantling weak arguments has cemented his status as a legend in political journalism. It's little surprise that politicians often go out of their way to avoid him, wary of the very real prospect of public embarrassment. For Starmer, that fear materialised. Neil's unyielding approach sent a clear message. If you step into his interview without absolute candour, you're in for a gruelling experience. Starmer should have seen it coming. 4 years ago, before he became Labour leader, he sat opposite Neil in an interview that remains infamous. At the time, Neil systematically deconstructed Starmer's statements on Labour's direction and his vision for the party, exposing cracks with his trademark precision.
You pledged that you would strengthen workers' rights
I did.
by repealing the 2016 Trade Union Act. Would you go further and repeal all the union laws passed since Mrs. Thatcher?
Well, I would repeal all of those that inhibit collective action. There's been a lot of provisions since then, most of them in trade.
Well, they
union
nearly
acts,
all
but
do.
not all of them. Well, nearly all of them do. But
So
you'd
would
have
you
to go
repeal them
through.
all?
I'd repeal all of those provisions, whether they're in those acts or other acts, that inhibit collective
It's not
action.
in your pledge.
Neil probed deeply into crucial topics, from policy specifics to leadership priorities. Starmer's answers lacked impact, revealing a leader unprepared for the top job. Neil was unrelenting, highlighting inconsistencies and flaws in Starmer's arguments. As the exchange unfolded, it was evident that Starmer was out of his depth, struggling to defend his positions effectively. This wasn't just a challenging interview, it was a ruthless dissection. Neil exposed vulnerabilities that critics later seized upon to question Starmer's credibility. For many, it marked the moment Starmer seemed more like a follower than a leader. As for Starmer, it's no surprise he's avoided stepping into the ring with Neil again.
Why haven't you declared all the major donors who are funding your leadership campaign?
Well, at the beginning of the campaign, the Labour Party set out the rules that we should all comply with, and they briefed us on it. And they involve doing the necessary checks on any donations, and then passing it to the parliamentary authorities so they can be published. And I'm following those rules.
But that's process. There's
Well,
a
no,
bigger,
that's not process, that's
well,
the
you're
rules.
following the process, but there's a bigger principle at stake that Labour Party members who are being asked to vote for you should know who's bankrolling your campaign.
After enduring Neil's relentless questioning, Starmer seems to have taken one lesson to heart: avoid him at all costs. Since those early encounters, Starmer has consistently declined invitations to face Neil again. And honestly, who could blame him? Neil's interviews are as unforgiving as they come. Starmer knows that once he takes that seat, there's no escaping the interrogation. Neil's unparalleled ability to expose flaws and inconsistencies makes him a formidable adversary. For Starmer, the stakes are even higher now as Prime Minister. One misstep under Neil's scrutiny could inflict damage on his leadership that no carefully crafted press release could undo.
And your pledge, it doesn't mention any of that.
Well, the pledge is very clearly that I will take whatever is necessary to stand with our trade unions, and I stand by that pledge.
But avoiding Neil doesn't solve the problem either. It sends a clear message to the public. Perhaps Starmer lacks the confidence to robustly defend his policies or leadership decisions. For Neil, it's yet another victory, reinforcing his reputation as the no-nonsense interviewer who even the most seasoned politicians fear. If Neil's interviews weren't intense enough, his grilling over donations raised the stakes further. Starmer found himself under fire for failing to disclose substantial financial backing, including donations from Lord Ali. Neil wasn't about to let that slide. He pressed hard for answers, leaving Starmer cornered with no room for evasion. It was a defining moment, showcasing Neil's unmatched ability to expose vulnerabilities and demand accountability.
Behind this process, why won't you simply tell us tonight who are your 5 biggest donors?
Andrew, how can you say I'm hiding behind a process when it's the Labour Party process? The Labour Party, at the beginning of
Because you're hiding behind the process.
No, the Labour Party
Why
said,
don't you do what the other candidates do and tell? Don't Labour members have a right,
Well,
as they decide whether to vote for you or not, they want to know where your money's coming from?
I've been asked that many times. I've said it's coming from trade unions, from crowdfunding, from individual donations.
Who's your biggest donor?
It's coming from those three. One of my biggest donors was put up on the website, I think, yesterday.
Right,
or
that's
the day
one of the lawyer.
Yeah.
That's the lawyer. But who are your 5 biggest donors?
Well,
you haven't announced. You've only announced about £125,000 worth of donations. This campaign costs a lot more than that. Doesn't transparency just demand? I mean, it's.
Starmer's attempts to downplay or divert the conversation only intensified Neil's persistence. Armed with documented evidence, Neil ensured viewers fully understood what was at stake. Starmer's reluctance to offer clear answers didn't just look bad, it cast a shadow over his commitment to transparency and accountability. For Neil, this was yet another example of why politicians fear him. He doesn't just ask questions, he exposes the weak points in their narratives. The issue of donations quickly escalated into a public spectacle, underscoring the very inconsistencies Neil has built his career uncovering. For Starmer, it was a moment that left an indelible mark on his credibility. But Neil wasn't finished. Turning his attention to housing policies, he probed further into Starmer's claims. While Starmer had praised new housing developments under his government, Neil countered with a stark statistic. 5 out of 7 homes were being allocated to migrants. Neil pressed on, referencing Gareth Snell, the former Labour MP for Stoke, who blamed Starmer for Labour's electoral losses. According to Snell, Starmer prioritised party membership over safeguarding parliamentary seats, a choice he described as catastrophic. The revelations ignited a heated exchange. Neil demanded answers as to why the government hadn't addressed public concerns over housing shortages for locals. Starmer's responses, vague and unconvincing, fell apart under Neil's relentless scrutiny. Neil's focus on indisputable facts left Starmer visibly rattled. The controversy only fueled criticism that Starmer's leadership was out of touch with public priorities. For viewers, this wasn't just about housing, it was about trust. And in that moment, it became clear that Starmer had lost even more of it.
Well, Gareth Snell was a Labour MP for Stoke.
Yeah.
Not anymore. He lost. He says he personally begged you to rethink the referendum policy. But he said he was ignored, in his words, because you thought being popular with the membership was more important to you than holding parliamentary seats. He sees you as a key reason for the defeat in December.
Well, Andrew, Gareth has his own view. What I can tell you is that members of Parliament in those seats, Toby Perkins in Chesterfield, Jenny Chapman, who lost her seat in Darlington, Emma Hardy in Hull, are all supporting me in this campaign, and they're all very close to their communities.
But what
so I know what Gareth said.
Right.
But look, one of the things...
And others say something
let me
different.
finish, because that's a fair challenge to me, you know. So what I've been trying to show in my campaign is that I do have the support and the backing of representatives, MPs, those who were MPs, and councillors and others in the very communities that make up what we're calling the Red Wall.
One of the most revealing moments in Neil's interviews came when he scrutinised Starmer's relationship with Jeremy Corbyn. Before taking over as Labour leader, Starmer had praised Corbyn as a close ally. But once in charge, he quickly distanced himself, even criticising Corbyn's leadership. Neil, as expected, didn't let this glaring inconsistency slide. He challenged Starmer on why his stance had shifted so dramatically. Was it a reflection of genuine conviction or mere political manoeuvring? Starmer's responses, vague and riddled with generalities, were no match for Neil's pointed follow-ups. It highlighted a pattern: Starmer's tendency to adapt his positions to serve his ambitions, undermining trust in his authenticity. This wasn't just about Corbyn. Neil's sharp questioning turned the focus to Starmer's broader reliability. Could he be trusted to stick to his word? For many viewers, the exchange exposed more about Starmer's character than his policies, creating a credibility issue that lingered. Neil's direct, fact-based approach also revealed Starmer's weakness in handling scrutiny over free movement and Brexit. When Starmer tried to argue that conversations in Red Wall constituencies showed nuanced opinions, Neil pressed on, presenting statistics and statements that painted a starkly different picture. Starmer's attempts to defend his stance grew increasingly incoherent as Neil calmly dismantled his arguments with precision. What made these moments so striking wasn't just Neil's expertise, but the psychological aspect of the exchange. Neil's composed demeanour contrasted sharply with Starmer's visible frustration. Neil never raised his voice or appeared flustered, while Starmer resorted to deflections, defensiveness, and long-winded explanations that only highlighted his lack of preparation. The conversation wasn't just an interview, it was a battle of control. Neil commanded the dialogue, leaving Starmer no room to manoeuvre. When Starmer pushed back, Neil countered with facts, each one more pointed than the last. For the audience, it was clear who was in charge, and it wasn't the Labour leader. This interaction reminded viewers why Neil remains unrivaled in political journalism. Starmer's struggles were a testament to the depth of Neil's preparation and his ability to expose weaknesses others might overlook. Starmer's underestimation of Neil's method was his undoing. He seemed to expect a conventional interview, one where he could dictate the narrative. Instead, he faced relentless scrutiny that tore apart his claims. By the end, Starmer's defeated demeanour spoke volumes. For Neil, it was another day at the office. For Starmer, it was a harsh lesson in the importance of preparation and consistency. And for the audience, it was a masterclass in political accountability, setting a benchmark for what tough, fair journalism should look like.